So to start the year off, we're starting with the endocrine system. So for those of you following along with the textbook, the relevant reading today is page 29 to 31. So when we talk about the endocrine system, it's really important that when we see this word endocrine, we think of the hormonal system. This is the system of hormones that controls your body in the long term. Now, the role of this endocrine system, very simply, is to coordinate or to control our bodies in order to maintain homeostasis. Now, this idea of homeostasis is something that you might be familiar with from previous years, but the key part of homeostasis is where we maintain a constant internal environment despite changing conditions. Now, these changing conditions might be inside the body. They also might be to do with things outside the body in the external environment. This year, we will touch on homeostasis in much more detail later on, but as of right now, you simply need to know that the endocrine system is what controls our body to help us maintain that nice, constant internal environment. How does the endocrine system do this? Well, the endocrine system changes and modifies the activity of cells by releasing these things called hormones. Now, when we're talking about hormones, a really easy definition for you to remember is that they are chemical messengers. These chemical messengers, these hormones, typically result in a much longer term change in our internal environment than we might see with things like the nervous system. The nervous system, when we're thinking of what it does, it controls things in the short term. So the nervous system would be something like moving your hand or clicking your fingers together. When we're talking about the endocrine system, we're talking about longer term changes, so in minutes, hours, sometimes days and weeks. When we talk about the endocrine system, it's also important that we talk about how these particular hormones are released. Now, the endocrine system is made up of a series of endocrine organs and endocrine glands. The job of these glands is very simply to secrete or to release hormones, and they release these hormones into the blood. And through the blood, through our circulatory system, is how these particular chemical messengers travel, and they travel to particular target cells around the body. Now, endocrine glands are also referred to as ductless glands because they do not release into ducts around the body. Again, they release into the blood. So an example, I've got an image here of an endocrine gland, and you can see that the blood in the capillaries is taking these hormones released by these yellow cells to different places around the body. Up next, one that we will talk about later on in the year is something known as an exocrine gland. Now, exocrine glands are going to be familiar to those who studied year 11 human biology, especially when we talk about things like the pancreas. But as of right now, our understanding of exocrine glands is quite simple. They secrete products other than hormones. So not the hormones themselves, but we're talking about things like digestive enzymes in the pancreas. And these other products are released into a duct, and this carries the secretion to maybe a cavity or to a body surface, in the case of sweat glands, which are an example of an exocrine gland. So as we can see here in our exocrine gland image on the bottom right of my slide, this here is a sweat gland. We can see these cells releasing this fluid, which I'll circle in blue here now, and this fluid, this sweat, this chemical secretion is released onto the surface of the skin. So the final slide here, nice short one today, is us looking at the different endocrine glands around the body, the different endocrine organs. So the first one that we are going to learn about throughout the year is the pineal gland, and I'll circle the pineal gland in yellow up the top here right now, and I'll highlight its labeling for you. The pineal gland is found in the brain, and the pineal gland is responsible for the release of the hormone melanin. Moving on down, we can also see in the brain we have some important structures. The next important structure, which I will underline in green here, is the pituitary gland. Now, the pituitary gland has two further lobes. It has both an anterior gland and a posterior gland, and we will talk about those in the coming lessons. Finally, just above the pituitary gland, we have another endocrine organ, and this is known as the hypothalamus. So we can see the thalamus labelled, but not the hypothalamus. Moving on down out of the brain, and if we follow the body from head to toe, our next stop in our endocrine organ search is going to be the thyroid gland. Now, we can see the thyroid gland. I'll try and highlight it in purple over on our body, but the thyroid gland is this butterfly-shaped gland responsible for the release of two hormones, thyroxine and triiodothyronine, and actually calcitonin as well. Now, this thyroid gland we will come to talk about in a few lessons' time, but behind the thyroid gland, I'll circle these in red here, a little faint on this diagram, are the parathyroid glands. And these parathyroid glands release parathyroid hormone. Below that, below the thyroid and the parathyroid glands, we have our next journey, or our next stop, which is this one I'm highlighting in green now. This is the thymus gland, and as we move down in our body, we reach our next stop, which is the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands are these hats that sit on top of the kidneys. They release things like adrenaline. Okay. We then get to the pancreas, and the pancreas is a really important one. We talk about glucose regulation because the pancreas is what releases insulin and glucagon. Okay. Finally, we have the uterus, the ovaries, and the testes. Now, the uterus, not so strictly part of the Year 12 course, so we're going to skip over it. But what is quite important, again, are the ovaries and testes. So that there is a very short snippet about the endocrine system.